is that there isn't a lot of information about your individual species. You might find that you're looking at, a particular kind of sea star, and when you go to look for information about its evolution, you just get nothing. So it might be that you have to take a step back and look at a broader category. So for example, with rock ptarmigans, when I was looking, it was like, well, it's not really clear like how that particular species evolved. But we could talk about the larger evolution of birds. We know they evolved from dinosaurs. There were minor changes in alleles that led to like sort of proto-feathers, which ultimately evolved through natural selection to true feathers. When you think back to the video we watched about the evolution of the wings, you can imagine like whatever these proto-feathers were for, they didn't serve the same purpose as true feathers, but they grew larger and longer and more complex, and as they did so, they started to be able to do the things that modern feathers can do. Yeah?
I think there was a study that was conducted in 2018 that suggests that these feathers were used for insulation because, like, with a lot of those species, they were living in very cold conditions due to overweight mass extinction.
Yeah, and so what he said was that there was a study a few years ago that looked at the function of these proto-feathers, and it was probably insulation. That makes a lot of sense to me. I know nothing about it, but that sounds pretty reasonable. And we know that there were dinosaurs that had feathers that were very similar to modern birds, and then we can think about things like beaks. Beaks are like one of the key characteristics of birds is toothless beaks, and you can look at the beaks of modern birds and see almost always a direct connection to diet. So we could tie together small changes in beak shapes and sizes and structures over long periods of time that could lead to rapid diversification. So that's if you wanted to look at like a bigger group. As it turns out, I was able to find some information about the evolution of ptarmigans. One of the things that they talked about was the idea that these organisms were occupying some sort of ecological habitat that no other organisms were living in. That's called a niche, and we didn't talk about that when we talked about ecology, but it's the idea that there's a unique combination of food resources and physical habitats that organisms inhabit. And if there's a spot where there is, some sort of area, place to live, and there's a food source that no other organisms are using, or that one particular organism can use better than another one, so there can be some competition, then there's opportunities for organisms to move into new habitats. And that's what happened is ptarmigans kind of moved into North America and spread out. We think that the whole group of ptarmigans evolved from crassids, or I don't know how you pronounce it, crassids or crachids. But the one thing that was really neat that I found was there is a subspecies called the Aleutian rock ptarmigan. And they were isolated on an archipelago, the Aleutian Islands off of Alaska. So there's that reproductive isolation. You get some birds that somehow make it to an island that's not easily get-toable. And then they have the opportunity to evolve in a slightly different habitat. And one of the things about those islands was that they're even colder than many other places because they're so exposed. So this subspecies of rock ptarmigans has more fat. They store more fat than most of the rest of the rock ptarmigans. And then the study that I looked at was in particular looking at how differences in glaciation accounts for differences in individual populations of this subspecies, and can kind of account for periods of isolation. So what would happen is you get kind of more extreme glaciation, populations would become more isolated, and then there would be periods of warming where there was less glaciation and populations would mix again, so you'd kind of get this back and forth. But ultimately, it's possible that this subspecies, the Aleutian rock ptarmigan, might become its own species, might lose the ability to interbreed with the rest of the rock ptarmigans, and that's how speciation would occur. So this is the kind of story that I'm looking for you to tell in the evolution project. The work that I've asked you to do so far is to tell me a little bit about the organism and some adaptations. On Wednesday, the big focus was looking at an adaptation, the coolest one you can find, and thinking about the evolution of that adaptation. Today, what I want you to tell me about is the species itself, either the specific organism you're looking at or the larger group that it's affiliated with. And you have the rest of the period to do this. If you want to take a break, now's a great time to do it. If you have questions, let me know. And this is going to be due at the end of the period, so I have you guys turn everything in at 9:39 or so.